The music thumped through the house, shaking the walls and vibrating the glasses on the kitchen counter. Our place was packed with friends, some familiar faces, and a few I barely recognized. It was our third wedding anniversary, and my wife Laura had gone all out. She insisted on a massive celebration, saying it was time we threw a party that would be talked about for years. 20 people were crammed into every corner of our house, laughing, dancing, and drinking like there was no tomorrow. I thought back to the early days of our relationship. Laura had been the life of the party then too. The kind of woman who could light up a room with her smile and keep everyone engaged with her quick wit. It was one of the things that had drawn me to her, but tonight, something was different. She seemed almost too eager, her laughter a little too loud, her smiles too forced. She was more radiant than ever, but there was something else beneath that radiance, something I couldn't quite place. I watched her from across the room as she mingled effortlessly, chatting with our friends and handing out drinks like a seasoned hostess. But my attention kept drifting back to the guy she'd invited, someone I had never met before. He was tall, muscular, and had this smug confidence about him that rubbed me the wrong way. When Laura introduced him as an old friend, I couldn't help but feel a sting of unease. She'd never mentioned him before, not once in the 3 years we'd been together. The night wore on, and the alcohol flowed freely. I tried to enjoy myself, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Laura was glued to the new guy's side, laughing at his jokes, leaning in a little too close. They were in their own world, barely noticing anyone else. I knocked back another drink, hoping the buzz would drown out my growing suspicions, but it didn't work. As the hours passed, I found myself sitting at the dining room table, staring blankly at the swirling crowd. People were dancing in the living room, the music drowning out the occasional burst of drunken laughter. I could feel the room spinning slightly, maybe I'd had one too many shots. Laura had been pouring them like candy, and I'd lost track after the 4th or 5th round. Then it happened. I heard a noise coming from our bedroom down the hall, soft at first, but unmistakable. It was rhythmic, the kind of sound you'd hear on those late-night movies that only come on after midnight. My heart pounded as I tried to focus, straining my ears over the music. I wanted to believe it was just my imagination, just 2 people laughing, or someone bumping into furniture, but I knew better. I stumbled to my feet and made my way toward the noise, pushing through the crowd. No one seemed to notice as I moved past them, my eyes fixed on the slightly ajar door at the end of the hallway. My hand trembled as I pushed it open, half expecting to find some embarrassing misunderstanding, a couple sneaking away for some private time, maybe. Instead, the room was empty. The bed was unmade, sheets tangled in a heap on the floor, and there was an open bottle of wine on the nightstand. The room reeked of sweat and cheap cologne, but the only sign of life was the faint rustling of the curtains in the breeze. I stood there for a moment, my mind racing, trying to piece together what had just happened. I was about to turn back when I heard the sound of footsteps, heavy, unsteady. Laura burst out of the adjoining bathroom, completely naked, her hair a mess, and her cheeks flushed. She froze when she saw me, her eyes widening in a mixture of surprise and guilt. Behind her, the guy she'd been flirting with all night staggered out, pulling on his pants, barely able to keep his balance. I stared at them, feeling a surge of anger, disbelief, and humiliation all at once. "What the hell is this?" I shouted, my voice louder than I'd intended. The music outside seemed to muffle, like the world was giving us this moment alone. Laura tried to cover herself with her hands, but it was too late. The damage was done. The guy sneered at me, his lip curled in a way that made my blood boil. Laura reached out to me, slurring, "It's not what you think, I swear." But her words were lost in the flood of rage that overtook me. I lunged at the guy, my fist connecting with his jaw before I even realized what I was doing. We went down hard, furniture crashing around us as the party outside continued blissfully unaware of the chaos unfolding within. I swung wildly, my vision blurred by fury and too much alcohol. He fought back, and for a moment, we were just 2 animals, driven by primal instincts. I didn't care about anything else. All I wanted was to hurt him, to make him pay for whatever had just happened. But then, a sharp pain exploded in my skull, and everything went black. I woke up to a pounding headache, the kind that makes you question every life choice that led to this point. The room was dimly lit by the early morning sun, casting long shadows across the walls. For a second, I wasn't sure where I was. My mind was foggy, and my body felt like it had been run over by a truck. As I tried to sit up, a sharp pain shot through my ribs, forcing me back down. "Take it easy," a voice said softly. I turned my head and saw Laura sitting beside me, her eyes puffy and red. She was dressed now, wearing a loose t-shirt and shorts, her hair still messy from last night. The room was empty, save for us. The house was eerily quiet, a stark contrast to the chaos of the party just hours ago. "What happened?" I groaned, struggling to piece together the fragments of the night. The fight, the shouting, the look on her face when I caught her, it all felt like a bad dream, but the bruises on my knuckles told me it was real. "You were dancing on the table," Laura said, her voice trembling. "You slipped and hit your head. I've been trying to wake you up for hours." I blinked, trying to process her words. It sounded ridiculous, but with the throbbing in my head, I couldn't argue. I looked around the room. There was no sign of the guy, no evidence of the fight. My memory was hazy, the details blurry. Laura's explanation seemed plausible, even though something inside me still nagged that she was lying. "I'm sorry," she said, her eyes filling with tears. "I should have stopped you. You were so drunk, we all were." She reached out, touching my arm gently, but I pulled away instinctively. I didn't want her comfort, I wanted answers. I got up slowly, ignoring the dizzy spell that hit me. The house was a mess. Empty bottles, discarded cups, and half-eaten plates of food were scattered everywhere. It looked like a scene straight out of a college frat party, not the kind of gathering you'd expect at a married couple's home. I made my way to the living room, where a few of our friends were sprawled out on the couch, sleeping off their hangovers. No one seemed to notice as I walked past them, heading straight for the kitchen. The guy was gone. I didn't even know his name, and Laura hadn't bothered to explain who he was or why he'd been there. I leaned against the counter, trying to make sense of it all. If what Laura said was true, why couldn't I remember dancing? Why did the fight feel so real, so vivid? I glanced at Laura, who was tidying up the living room, avoiding my gaze. I could see the guilt in her posture, the way she flinched at every loud noise. Something was definitely off, but confronting her now seemed pointless. She wasn't ready to tell me the truth, and maybe I wasn't ready to hear it. As I cleaned up the mess, I replayed the night over and over in my head, trying to piece together what was real and what was alcohol-fueled paranoia. The sounds from the bedroom, the way Laura and that guy had rushed out, the fight, it all felt so tangible. But now, in the cold light of day, I was starting to doubt myself. Maybe I really had been too drunk to think straight. Maybe Laura was right, and this was all just some horrible misunderstanding. But then, as I gathered the empty bottles into a trash bag, something caught my eye, a pair of lace underwear, crumpled up under the coffee table. They weren't mine, and judging by the color and style, they weren't Laura's either. I picked them up, my heart racing. This wasn't something you just misplace, and it wasn't something you'd leave behind accidentally. I stuffed the underwear into my pocket and continued cleaning, my mind racing. The discovery only fueled my suspicions, but I kept my mouth shut. I needed to be sure. I needed proof. Later, as Laura pretended everything was fine, I watched her closely. She was trying too hard, smiling, laughing, cleaning up the remnants of the party like nothing had happened. But every now and then, her facade would crack, and I'd catch a glimpse of the fear in her eyes. She was hiding something, and it was only a matter of time before I found out what. We spent the rest of the day in a tense silence, neither of us willing to address the elephant in the room. I couldn't stop thinking about those noises I'd heard, the look of panic on Laura's face, and the way she'd scrambled to cover it all up. If she was lying about last night, what else was she hiding? As the evening approached, our friends slowly began to wake up, groaning as they nursed their hangovers. The party had taken a toll on everyone, but none more so than me. I could see it in their faces. They had no idea what had really gone down last night, and I wasn't about to enlighten them. I needed to figure this out on my own. Laura kept hovering near me, watching my every move. It was like she was waiting for me to explode, to demand answers she wasn't ready to give. But I stayed calm, playing along with her version of events. I wasn't about to let on that I knew something was wrong. Not yet. When the last of our friends finally left, Laura turned to me, forcing a smile. "Let's just forget about last night, okay?" she said, her voice pleading. "It was stupid. We were all too drunk. Let's not let it ruin us." I nodded, but I wasn't convinced. I'd seen too much, heard too much. Something had happened in that bedroom, something Laura was desperate to hide. And now, with the sun setting on the wreckage of our anniversary party, I knew one thing for sure: I wasn't going to let it go. I woke up the next morning with an uneasy feeling gnawing at me. The sun was already peeking through the blinds, casting slivers of light across the room. I lay there for a moment, staring at the ceiling, trying to piece together my thoughts. The headache from yesterday had subsided, but my mind was anything but clear. The events of the party kept replaying in my head like a broken record, and every time I thought I had a handle on it, something didn't quite add up. Laura was still asleep beside me, her breathing slow and steady. She looked peaceful, innocent even, but the memory of her stumbling out of that room with that guy kept clawing at my mind. I turned away from her, the anger simmering beneath the surface. I needed answers, and I was going to get them. I got up quietly, careful not to wake her, and headed to the kitchen. I poured myself a cup of coffee and sat at the table, staring at the spot where Laura and that guy had been sitting all night. I tried to push the image out of my head, but it kept coming back, stronger each time. I needed to confront her, to force the truth out, but a part of me was scared of what I'd find. As I sipped my coffee, the events of the fight played back in my mind. I remembered lunging at him, the brief but intense scuffle, and then, nothing. Everything went black. Laura's version of events didn't make sense, but it was all I had to go on. Had I really been so drunk that I'd imagined the whole thing? Or was she just spinning a story to cover up something far worse? I was still lost in thought when Laura walked into the kitchen, rubbing her eyes. She gave me a weak smile, the kind that said she was still testing the waters. I set my cup down and watched her carefully. She moved slowly, cautiously, like she was afraid of setting me off. "How are you feeling?" she asked, her voice soft. She poured herself a coffee and sat down across from me, her eyes scanning my face for any hint of anger. "I'm fine," I said flatly, "just trying to piece together what happened." She nodded, her fingers tapping nervously on the rim of her cup. "I'm really sorry about last night. I shouldn't have let things get so out of hand." I stared at her, waiting for her to say more. I wanted her to come clean, to explain what I'd seen, but she just kept sipping her coffee, avoiding my gaze. I couldn't take it anymore. I had to know. "Laura," I said, my voice firmer now. "What happened in that bedroom?" She froze, the color draining from her face. Her eyes flickered with panic, but she quickly masked it with a shaky smile. "Nothing," she said too quickly. "I told you you were just drunk. You fell and—" "Stop lying." I snapped, slamming my fist on the table. The noise echoed through the kitchen, and Laura jumped, spilling her coffee. "I saw you with him. I heard the noises coming from our room. Don't tell me I imagined it." She blinked rapidly, her eyes welling up with tears. "You don't remember," she whispered, her voice breaking. "You were so drunk and we were all just having fun. Nothing happened, I swear." But I didn't believe her. The look on her face, the way her voice trembled, it was all too rehearsed, too deliberate. I could feel my blood boiling as I stared her down. I wanted to drag the truth out of her, to force her to admit what she'd done, but she was clinging to her lie like a lifeline. "You think I'm an idiot, don't you?" I said, my voice dripping with sarcasm. "I know what I saw, Laura. I know what I heard. You and that guy, you were—" Before I could finish, Laura jumped up, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. She was crying now, but not the guilty, apologetic kind of crying. This was different. She looked terrified, almost desperate. "Please, just stop," she begged, her voice breaking. "I'm telling you the truth. Nothing happened. You were out of control, and I didn't know how to handle it. I just wanted to keep you safe." I stared at her, my mind racing. Her story was falling apart at the seams, but she was still clinging to it with everything she had. I could see the cracks, the desperation in her eyes, but she wasn't ready to admit the truth. "Who was that guy, Laura?" I asked, my voice low and steady. Why was he here? Why were you alone with him? She wiped her tears and looked away, refusing to meet my gaze. He's just a friend, she mumbled. Someone I used to know. He's going through a hard time, and I thought inviting him would cheer him up. I laughed bitterly. So you thought inviting him into our bedroom would cheer him up, huh? She flinched at my words, her face twisting with guilt. But instead of confessing, she doubled down, her voice rising defensively. I wasn't in the bedroom with him. You're confused. You were out of control, and I didn't know how to handle you. I was trying to help. I wanted to believe her. I wanted to think that I was just being paranoid, that the alcohol had clouded my judgment, but everything about her screamed deceit. The way she kept looking at the floor, the cracks in her voice, the way she couldn't give me a straight answer, it was all wrong. I leaned back, defeated. There was no point in arguing with her anymore. She wasn't going to tell me the truth, not today. But I wasn't going to let this go. I would find out what happened one way or another. Fine, I said, my voice cold. But if I find out you're lying to me, Laura, there's no coming back from this. She nodded silently, her tears still flowing, but she said nothing more. We sat there in tense silence, the unspoken accusations hanging heavy in the air. I didn't know what was real anymore, but one thing was clear, something had broken between us that night, and I didn't know if it could ever be fixed. The days following the party were a blur of awkward silences and forced smiles. Laura and I barely spoke beyond the basics of daily life, passing each other in the hallway, sharing quiet meals, and avoiding eye contact. The house, once filled with laughter and the warmth of our shared lives, now felt cold and unfamiliar. Every corner seemed to echo with the unspoken truth that neither of us was willing to face. I spent most of my time buried in work, using the busy hours as a shield against the growing tension. But every night, as I lay in bed beside Laura, the same questions haunted me. Why was she lying? What was she hiding? The memories of the fight, the noises from the bedroom, and the guy's smug face flashed in my mind like a cruel slideshow, reminding me that I couldn't keep ignoring what had happened. It wasn't until a few days later that things began to unravel. I was sitting alone in the living room, staring blankly at the television when a sudden flash of memory hit me, vivid, sharp, and undeniable. It was like a missing puzzle piece falling into place, and it shook me to my core. I remembered the guy's mocking grin as he staggered out of our bedroom, and Laura's frantic attempt to cover herself. I remembered charging at him, fists flying, and the sickening crack of my head hitting the floor when he'd landed a brutal punch. The scene played out in my mind with startling clarity, and I realized then that Laura's story had been a lie all along. I hadn't slipped off a table, I'd been knocked out cold during a fight. Laura's attempts to rewrite the night were nothing more than a desperate cover-up, and now I was left grappling with the ugly truth of what I'd seen. Fueled by anger, I jumped up from the couch, the need for confrontation burning inside me. I marched straight into the kitchen where Laura was busy chopping vegetables, pretending that everything was perfectly normal. She looked up as I entered, her smile faltering at the sight of my furious expression. "We need to talk," I said, my voice barely masking my rage. Laura set down the knife, her hands trembling slightly. "What's going on? You're scaring me." "Good," I snapped, slamming my fist on the counter. "Maybe you should be scared. I remember everything, Laura. The fight, the noises, everything. I know you've been lying to me." Her face went pale, and for a moment, I thought she was going to finally come clean. But instead, she just shook her head, her eyes welling up with tears. "I don't know what you're talking about," she whispered, her voice weak. "You're confused. You..." "Stop it," I shouted, cutting her off. "I'm not confused and I'm not drunk now. I remember you running out of that room with him, completely naked. I remember fighting him. You've been lying to me this whole time." Laura backed away, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Please, just calm down. You're scaring me and you're wrong. You're remembering things wrong." But I could see the truth in her eyes. The guilt, the panic, it was all there, and it only fueled my anger. I grabbed her by the shoulders, forcing her to look at me. "Tell me what happened," I demanded, my voice shaking. "Tell me the truth. Who is he, and why was he in our bedroom with you?" She pulled away from me, sobbing uncontrollably. "I didn't mean for it to happen," she finally blurted out, her voice choked with emotion. "I was drunk, and he kept flirting with me. One thing led to another, and I made a mistake. A horrible mistake." Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. I stumbled back, feeling like the ground had been ripped out from under me. I'd suspected it all along, but hearing her say it out loud made it real in a way I wasn't prepared for. My wife, the woman I'd trusted with everything, had betrayed me in our own home, in our own bed. "How could you do this?" I whispered, my voice breaking. "After everything we've been through, how could you throw it all away for some random guy?" Laura sank to the floor, her sobs echoing through the kitchen. "I'm sorry," she cried. "I didn't want to hurt you. I was stupid and drunk, and I didn't think. It meant nothing. He means nothing." But her apologies felt hollow. I couldn't even look at her without feeling a surge of disgust. "Who is he?" I demanded again, my anger bubbling to the surface. "How long has this been going on?" She shook her head, wiping her tears with trembling hands. "He's just a friend I used to know from work. It was the first time. I swear. I don't even know why I invited him. I was stupid. It didn't mean anything." I wanted to believe her. I wanted to think that this was just a one-time mistake, a drunken lapse in judgment, but the way she spoke, the shame in her voice, told me there was more to the story. The guy hadn't just been a random friend. There was history there, and whatever had happened that night was just the tip of the iceberg. I stared at her, my mind racing. I couldn't stay in the same room with her, couldn't bear the sight of her broken expression. "I need some air," I muttered, turning away. I grabbed my keys off the counter and stormed out the door, slamming it behind me. I drove aimlessly, my thoughts tangled in a web of anger, betrayal, and disbelief. Laura's confession played over and over in my head, each word cutting deeper than the last. I pulled over to the side of the road, gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. My whole life had just been turned upside down, and I had no idea what to do next. Laura's tears, her apologies, they all felt like lies now. Everything she'd ever told me, every promise, every reassurance, it all felt tainted, worthless. I couldn't stop thinking about how easily she'd betrayed me, how she'd let another man into our home, our marriage. The woman I thought I knew was gone, replaced by a stranger I could barely recognize. I sat there for hours, lost in my thoughts, until the sun began to set. As the sky darkened, I knew I couldn't avoid the inevitable confrontation forever. I had to go back, had to face Laura and decide what came next. But one thing was clear, whatever had broken between us wasn't going to be fixed with tears and apologies. I started the car and drove back home, my mind set on finding out the full truth, no matter how much it hurt. The days passed slowly, each one a reminder of the betrayal that had shattered my life. Laura's confession played over and over in my mind, her tearful apologies now feeling as empty as our marriage. I couldn't stand being in the same house with her. Every time I looked at her, all I saw was the woman who had lied to me, who had let another man into our bed. The anger that simmered inside me was no longer just directed at Laura. It was now a burning need for revenge. I couldn't let this go. The guy she'd cheated with had disrespected me in my own home, and Laura had played me for a fool. I needed to make them both pay. I couldn't just confront her and leave it at that. It would never be enough. I had to get back at them in a way they would never forget. My first move was to find out everything I could about the guy. I knew his face well enough from that night. Tall, athletic, smug, with that irritating grin I couldn't wipe from my mind. Laura had said he was an old friend, but I knew she was lying or at least hiding something. I started by checking her social media and phone when she wasn't around. I scrolled through her contacts, text messages, and even went through her hidden photo albums, but there was nothing linking her to him directly. She had covered her tracks well, too well for this to be a one-time mistake. Then, one afternoon while Laura was out, I found what I was looking for. Tucked away in the back of her desk drawer was an old business card, worn and creased but still readable. It had his name, Michael Thompson, along with a company name and address. It was a small victory, but it was enough to get started. I began following Michael. I staked out his workplace, watching him come and go, trying to figure out who he was. It wasn't long before I discovered he had a pattern. He went to the same bar every Friday night after work, always looking to pick up women. I watched him flirt with anyone who gave him the time of day, using the same charm he'd likely used on Laura. The more I watched, the angrier I became. This guy wasn't just some random fling. He was a predator, and he'd set his sights on my wife. It was a Saturday night when I finally made my move. I had seen enough. I walked into the bar where Michael was holding court, surrounded by a group of women, laughing and playing the part of the charming bachelor. He didn't notice me at first, too wrapped up in his act. But as I approached, he glanced up, and his smile faltered. He recognized me immediately. "What the hell do you want?" he sneered, his bravado slipping as he took in my furious expression. I didn't respond. I grabbed him by the collar and dragged him outside before anyone could react. We stumbled into the alley behind the bar, his protests lost in the noise of the city. Michael tried to shove me off, but I was done playing nice. I threw him against the wall, my fists landing blow after blow. He swung back, but I didn't care. This was personal. This was for every lie, every moment Laura had stolen from me. Was it worth it? I shouted between punches. Was it worth ruining my marriage? Michael tried to fight back, but he was no match for my rage. He finally collapsed to the ground, bloodied and gasping, but I wasn't finished. I kicked him hard, sending him sprawling into the dirt. "You're done," I snarled, standing over him. "You ever go near my wife again, and I'll make sure you regret it." He lay there, barely able to speak, and for a moment, I felt a twisted sense of satisfaction. But it wasn't enough. Hurting him physically didn't make the pain go away. It didn't fix what had been broken between Laura and me. It was a hollow victory, one that only deepened my resolve to do more. When I got home that night, Laura was waiting for me, her eyes wide with fear. She must have known where I'd gone, but she didn't dare ask. I stormed past her, my hands still shaking from the fight, and locked myself in the guest room. I couldn't bear to look at her, to hear her excuses or apologies. I needed to be alone with my thoughts, to figure out my next move. The next morning, I woke up with a clearer head. Michael was dealt with, but Laura still had to face the consequences. I couldn't just sit back and let her think that she could get away with what she'd done. I needed to show her that her actions had consequences, public ones. I spent the next few days meticulously planning. I dug up everything I could on Michael, every embarrassing detail of his life, and put it together in a neat little package. I sent it to his employer anonymously, highlighting his frequent bar fights and his questionable behavior with women. I knew it would ruin him, but that was the point. I wanted him to lose everything just like I had. Next, I turned my attention to Laura. I didn't want to hurt her physically, but I needed her to feel the shame of what she'd done. I invited her closest friends over for dinner, pretending that we were trying to work things out. Laura was hesitant but agreed, likely hoping this was a sign that I was moving past my anger. But what she didn't know was that I'd prepared a little surprise for the evening. After dinner, I calmly stood up and played a recording of our confrontation, the one where she admitted to cheating. The room fell silent as Laura's voice echoed through the living room, her tearful confession laid bare for all to hear. Her friends sat in stunned silence, some gasping, others too shocked to react. Laura's face turned white as she realized what was happening. "Consider this your payback," I said coldly as Laura ran out of the room, humiliated and sobbing. The fallout was immediate. Laura's friends turned on her, unable to hide their disgust. She was now the subject of gossip and judgment, her perfect social facade crumbling. I watched her retreat into herself, unable to face anyone, and for the first time since the affair, I felt a sense of closure. Laura had betrayed me, but now she had to live with the consequences of her actions, just as I had. The days after I exposed Laura felt surreal. Our house, once filled with warmth, was now nothing but a battleground of silence and regret. Laura avoided me, locking herself away in our bedroom, crying herself to sleep each night. She was a shell of the vibrant woman I had married, and yet, I couldn't bring myself to feel sorry for her. She had made her choices, and now she was paying the price. The fallout from the dinner had been swift. Laura's friends stopped calling, some blocked her completely, and others simply faded away, unwilling to be associated with the scandal that now surrounded her. Michael, on the other hand, had lost his job, his reputation dragged through the mud. I'd heard through the grapevine that he was barely scraping by, jobless and humiliated. But none of it brought me peace. The revenge I'd sought so desperately felt hollow now, leaving only a bitter taste in my mouth. I spent most of my days in a daze, going through the motions but feeling disconnected from everything around me. Laura and I rarely spoke. When we did, it was strained and awkward, as if we were two strangers forced to share the same space. She tried to reach out a few times, offering apologies that felt as empty as my heart. Each attempt was met with cold indifference. I wasn't ready to forgive, and I didn't know if I ever would be. One afternoon, I found myself sitting alone in the backyard, staring at the spot where we'd shared so many happy memories. It was where we'd had our first barbecue as newlyweds, where we'd laughed and planned our future together. Now, it was just another reminder of everything we'd lost. I heard the door creak open behind me, and Laura stepped out, looking more fragile than I'd ever seen her. "Can we talk?" she asked softly, her voice barely above a whisper. She looked exhausted, her eyes puffy and red from days of crying. I nodded, not out of kindness, but because I knew this conversation was long overdue. She sat beside me, keeping a careful distance, as if afraid to get too close. "I'm sorry," she began, her voice breaking. "I know that doesn't fix anything, but I need you to know how sorry I am. I was stupid and selfish, and I've ruined everything. I hate myself for what I did to you." I stared at her, feeling a mix of anger, sadness, and something I couldn't quite name. "Why, Laura? Why did you do it? Was it me? Was it something I did?" She shook her head, tears spilling down her cheeks. "No, it was never you. You've always been good to me, better than I deserved. I don't know. I was bored, I was drunk, and Michael, he made me feel wanted in a way that I can't explain. It was a stupid, impulsive decision, and it meant nothing." I scoffed, my anger flaring up again. "It meant nothing? You ruined our marriage for something that meant nothing." Laura buried her face in her hands, sobbing uncontrollably. "I know I did. I know I messed up. But I swear it was the first time, and I would have never done it again. I didn't think I'd lose everything." We sat in silence for a long time, her words hanging heavily in the air. I wanted to yell, to scream, to make her feel the pain I'd felt every day since that night. But I was too tired. The anger had burned me out, leaving me numb and empty. "I don't know if I can ever forgive you," I said finally, my voice hollow. "You broke something in me, something I don't think can be fixed." Laura nodded, wiping her tears. "I don't expect you to. I just want you to know that I love you, even if I don't deserve your love anymore." We stayed there for hours, saying nothing, just two broken people trying to make sense of the wreckage. For the first time in weeks, I saw the woman I had fallen in love with, not the liar, not the cheater, but the person who had been my partner, my confidant. But it wasn't enough to undo the damage. Over the next few weeks, things between us remained strained but civil. We decided to separate, at least temporarily, to give each other space to heal. Laura moved in with her sister, while I stayed behind, grappling with the silence of an empty house. The separation wasn't meant to be permanent, but neither of us could say for sure what the future held. We were both lost, navigating a storm of emotions that no amount of time seemed capable of calming. One evening, a few days after Laura had moved out, I found myself scrolling through old photos on my phone, pictures of vacations, anniversaries, and small, intimate moments that had defined our life together. There was one photo that caught my eye, Laura and I on our wedding day, beaming at each other, completely unaware of the heartache that lay ahead. I stared at it for a long time, feeling a strange sense of nostalgia mixed with sadness. I realized that, despite everything, part of me still loved her. I didn't know if that love could ever be enough to bring us back together, but it was there, buried beneath all the anger and hurt. I didn't have all the answers yet, but I knew I couldn't let revenge consume the rest of my life. I had to find a way to move forward, whether that meant forgiving Laura or simply letting go of the past. The next morning, I called Laura. We talked for hours, not about the affair, but about us, who we were, who we'd been, and who we wanted to be. It wasn't a reconciliation, not yet, But it was a start. We agreed to go to therapy, separately at first, and then together if we felt ready. It was a small step, but it was something. As I hung up the phone, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. For the first time in a long time, I felt like maybe, just maybe, we could find a way to heal. It wouldn't be easy, and it wouldn't happen overnight, but I was willing to try. I didn't know if Laura and I would ever fully recover from the betrayal, but I knew that we owed it to ourselves to at least try. In the end, revenge had brought me nothing but more pain. It was forgiveness, slow, difficult, and imperfect, that offered the faintest glimmer of hope. And maybe that was enough.